quick background on Dave. Obviously, we're friends dating back to our UC San Diego days. Board certified in anesthesiology, addiction medicine, and preventive medicine. Also medical director of my MAT clinic and Pulse Addiction. He'll talk a little bit about what that is, MAT, and how he's come kind of into this space. And what our goal is to talk about is preventative. We spend so much time in the media and talking about, oh my gosh, how do we get a vaccine? When's that's going to happen? Everything that might happen after the fact. And Dave and I were comparing notes. So why don't we spend more time talking about what we can do right now in terms of getting sleep, doing the things that we could take care of to combat the possibility of even catching this virus. So Dave's obviously passionate about the subject. He put a lot of time and energy into it. I'll let him speak to the homework that he's put into it. But once we get through some of the behavioral shifts, we're going to offer some supplements, vitamins, things that you can do. And by the way, these are things you can get in GNC. This is not like a network marketing pitch. This is something you could get on your own. These are real vitamins and supplements. Obviously, we want to make a disclaimer, and I know Dave will reiterate this. Dave's not your doctor, so we'd recommend if you have learned something or to have takeaways, speak to a nutritionist or your own doctor about anything you might do on your own. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. So, Dave, thanks for coming in today. Tell me a little bit about the background to this topic before we get into it. You're very passionate about this topic, and I know you've done a lot of homework. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on delivering this passionate message today.
Yeah, well, it's we've had a number of webinars now talking about how COVID has impacted mental health and substance use disorders, which is one of my specialties. And basically, it's exacerbated everything. It's made almost all conditions relating to mental health and addiction worse. But I also spend half my time working in the hospital as an anesthesiologist, and that life has been directly impacted as well. And what kept coming up for me is that friends and family kept asking about, well, what are preventative things that I can do? What are preventative things we can do? So I put together this vitamins page, and I sent it out to my friends and family, and then they sent it out to their friends, and they're like, oh, you should talk on this. This is something that, people want to hear about. So that's kind of how it started. And then the second thing is the US is all in the news and everything. There's all this talk on vaccines and when's the vaccine going to come, but there's not nearly enough discussion on what we can do every day to make ourselves healthier and prevent us from getting sick. Or if we do get sick, what can we do to minimize the impact of getting sick, not ending up in the hospital or on a ventilator, for example. And there's a lot of really, really good data to basic things that people can do to improve their odds. That's what we're doing today.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to make sure I bring this point home, because obviously when this whole thing came about in our country, February, March, mainly March, it's become such a political topic. Today is not about politics. Today is not about where you are on the spectrum on this stuff. We're coming at this from a very objective perspective. And that's one thing. You've always been a good counsel for me. I know we can put left and right away, and just you give me good coaching on the things I should do. And every single piece of advice that you're about to hear about supplements and vitamins, my wife and I did our own research, talked to our people on our end, went to Amazon, ordered everything the next day. So we've been doing this. But I want you to speak to, about kind of the behaviors and the beliefs in our country, because you in our notes you were talking about we're the only country that still has these things going on. So let's get that out of the way.
All the countries have it going on. It's just that a lot of countries have successfully taken measures and had a lot more sort of, action, people that were sort of moving in the same direction with regards to those measures. And so their numbers went down rather dramatically. And the United States, by contrast, is the only first world country that has not had their numbers go down in any sustained way. And basically in the news every day, all you're hearing about is numbers exploding in Florida, Arizona, Texas, and a lot of it has to do with behavior patterns, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. So, now, what about the one big goal we talk about, is obviously to avoid getting this, right? So speak a little bit into that, because I think that's important. People, they need to hear that when we talk about immunity, we're talking about, things you could do to support yourself, but the number one goal is to avoid it. And secondly, if you did get it, you're minimizing. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So the two parts to this talk, number one is, talk about avoidance of getting it and why. Another part is, okay, so let's say you have an exposure to somebody, what are things you can do to minimize your chances of catching it and or decreasing the severity of illness? Because the grand majority of people have mild illness, and you want to be one of those people, if anything, right? So in the absence of a vaccine, whether it comes this fall, which I think is unlikely, it'll probably be early next year, which is still very, very fast for vaccines, by the way. What are we doing? We're basically biding time. And the number one thing you want to do is you want to prevent yourself from getting this, right? And so aside from masks and hand washing and all the things that like what are the things what is the main reason you want to avoid getting it? And you want to buy yourself time for a number of reasons. Every month that we've been dealing with this, has allowed the scientific and medical community to basically advance their understanding of how to treat this disease, who it affects, why. And so we are seeing the fruits of that in that our death rate in the United States is dramatically decreasing. And and this has in large part to do with we're just better at treating it now.
Yeah. What can you give some examples? Because I've been working together for some time, and obviously during COVID, we've kind of stepped up our game on doing things like this to educate people and come together and share knowledge. So I remember back in March and April, literally you're in Orange County, and you and we have some mutual doctor friends who are telling me how crazy it was on the front lines, and you're being pulled off electives and being put on the front lines. So, but the way things were being treated or triaged at that time are much different than what happens now if you went to the hospital. Can you give us a couple quick examples? I know you use some medical jargon here, but maybe you can make it simple for us to understand what's different in the treatment in March, April than you see now, because you say the death rates obviously are going down. Even if case counts may be there because our behaviors haven't shifted, the death rates are going down. Can you speak to a couple examples there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was kind of scary in the hospital in March because we understood so little and we didn't have enough. We were running out of certain types of basic equipment, like the N95 masks and gowns. But what we were able to do between March and April is basically come out with protocols for how we as medical providers in the hospital deal with somebody who has symptoms and may be positive or who is straight up positive, who needs to have surgery. Because as an anesthesiologist, I'm in the operating room or on labor and delivery, and we're providing treatments for people. So our understanding of how to go about treating people without exposing ourselves or spreading it has advanced dramatically. But so have our treatments. Early on, for example, we held the belief that, as patients' oxygen levels were decreasing, one of the things we needed to do is get patients onto ventilators earlier rather than later. That has gone 180. Once you're on a ventilator with this disease, your chances of surviving go down dramatically. We understand that now. So the things that we were doing back in March and April are not the things we're doing in terms of ventilators now. What we do now, for example, is we keep people off the ventilator as long as possible, even if their oxygen levels are extremely low. And one of the biggest things we do is we have people lay on their stomachs, which is called proning. And proning has been shown to decrease the chances of ending up on a ventilator. And again, what is it doing? It's buying us time to get treatments on board or to get treatments into the patient that decrease to turn it around, because it's a disease of inflammation. It's like a wildfire getting out of control that ends up with called a cytokine storm, which is what ends up killing you. And if we can stop that process or reverse that process, then we can basically improve survival rather dramatically. And all of this came about because we just needed more time to understand how to treat this disease.
Yeah, great. There's a term that gets thrown around the media quite a bit, and I want you to speak to it because I think it talks about the things that have changed from March to now, but this word morbidity. Can you explain what that is? Because you see it on the reports, and I see reporters using that word like they sometimes don't even know what it is. Can you explain to our group here what that means when we hear it?
We don't. So this is another sort of pet peeve of mine, is that what you hear on the news all the time is mortality, which means death. So you have the amount of infected people, and then a percentage of them go on to die, right? But in between that is the people that get sick. Some get mildly sick, like a little like cold, flu, stay at home. Some get pretty bad, but still don't need to go to the hospital. Some go to the hospital and others end up in the ICU. And morbidity is basically meaning, it's a term that basically means having consequences of being very ill. And when people say to me, oh, I'm just going to get it and I'll be fine, I'm not going to die from this, I go, well, that's great. You're not going to die, but you could have your life seriously impacted by this disease and not die. So things like lung scarring, strokes, people have had amputations, dead bowel. I personally know a nurse that I worked with who caught it early on in one of our surgery centers, and she has not returned to work since March. And she has severe nerve damage as a result of having had COVID. Initially, she couldn't even pick up something with her hand without it falling out of her hand. So these things are not discussed nearly enough. The bottom line is you don't want this disease, because even if you don't die, there's a very, very good chance that you could be, chronically injured by having one of the bad outcomes of this. So, and it's a multi-systemic disease. It can affect any part of your body. I mean, we focus on the lungs because that's where the disease, causes the whole ventilation problem and breathing problem and low oxygen problem through inflammation and lung scarring, but it can affect all kinds of other organ systems within your body.
All right, so let's get to it. I think that's good for the introduction, kind of high level. We're going to get to what I call BVS, behaviors, vitamins, supplements, BVS. So before we get into the vitamins supplements, which is going to be a big crux of today, we have to address behaviors. And by the way, Dave and I, if you haven't done it, feel free to email us. We did a webinar about a month ago, and it was combating anxiety and depression. We talked about getting sleep and water, some fundamental things, but so this is not a reiteration. If you're tuning in again, this is more of the same. And that part, that's a behavior. The rest of it, in terms of the supplements, vitamins, is new material. But Dave, let's speak to the behaviors. I think it's important people get this because people may not have joined our last webinar.
Yeah, so last webinar we talked about behavior patterns that have been shown to improve mental health and reduce anxiety. And there's definitely overlap here. Without getting too scientific about it, it has to do with things like circulating cortisol levels, circulating levels of catecholamines, which are like epinephrine, adrenaline, serotonin, dopamine. It turns out that some of these same behavior patterns also greatly impact your immune function. And that would make sense. I mean, the things that are promoting mental health through improving certain types of neurohormones or neurotransmitters are also the same things that are going on with your overall physical health, right? Like your immunity, your cardiovascular function. And when these things become dysregulated or out of balance, then you run into trouble. And I mean, top of the list, number one is sleep. Again, same with mental health and same with physical health. The data with regards to sleep and immune function isn't even debatable. It's fact. Adult human beings need 7 to 8 hours, some people 9 hours of high quality sleep to optimize their immune function. And most people don't get it. And I could go into why that is, but if I had to pick one thing on this list, it's sleep.
Yeah, that's the free bang for your buck, as you call it, right? Bang for your buck. It doesn't
biggest bang for your buck is adequate sleep every night.
And then mention a couple of other things before we get into the diet part of it too. I know there's at least a handful of other things real quick that you could hit in terms of behavior beyond sleep.
Yeah, regular moderate exercise has been shown again and again to improve immune function. They've done studies where they've given people like vaccines for a known disease, and the people that exercised, when they measured their antibody levels, which is the response to the vaccine, they had higher antibody levels. And similarly, they've done the exact same thing with sleep studies. They take two groups of people, they give them a vaccine, they deprive one group of sleep and the other one gets sleep, and they measure their antibody levels, and guess what? The antibodies are much higher in the people that are getting the adequate sleep. So It's the same thing. A vaccine produces antibodies just like your exposure to a disease produces antibodies, and that's what gives you the protection against that disease, reinfection, for example.
And then in terms of hydration, you got to hit that one. That's a big one we talked about last time. Most people are dehydrated in this country.
Hydration is important for a number of reasons. But one of the main reasons with regards to your immune function is that your lymphatic system is extremely important in regulating and optimizing your immune function. And when you're dehydrated, you don't have as much lymphatic flow, or it doesn't work as effectively. And so just in terms of your lymphatic system with your lymph nodes, where a bunch of white blood cells hang out and are exposed to foreign pathogens, which are bacteria and viruses and cancer cells, they need to have adequate lymph flow in order to function properly.
Yep. Now, of course, the last one before we get to the big stuff here is the food intake, right? The diet, what you're taking in. I always call it, garbage in, garbage out.
So one thing that we're seeing in terms of patient populations that are doing much worse with COVID, obese patients by far and away end up hospitalized or in the ICU or on ventilators or die much more frequently than non-obese people. And there's probably a number of reasons for this. Chronic inflammation is one of them, and that has a lot to do with diet and vitamin balance. For example, people with obesity they often have problems with vitamin D levels, and we'll talk about the importance of vitamin D. They also have more systemic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and the more diseases that you have at baseline when you get infected with COVID, the more likely that you're going to have problems and do poorly. So maintaining a healthy weight is very important, and that has to do with nutrition, and that has to do with exercise and everything else. So these things are all interrelated, by the way. Sleep. You don't sleep enough, you have high cortisol levels. You have high cortisol levels, you have high circulating sugar or glucose in your bloodstream, right? What does that lead to? It leads to things like insulin insensitivity and weight gain and inflammation. So these behavioral habits, and again, we'll put out a document after this that has all of the suggestions that we're making and links and resources, but they're all interrelated.
Yep. All right, so let's get into the this famous document that's been circulating amongst our friendship group and my family for sure. Let's get into I guess it's your top 5. These are your vitamins and supplements that a lot of people overlook. I don't want to give away anything because when you say it, I'm going to chime in, but I was blown away by a couple things that I very, very, I would say deficient in. So thank you very much for your advice. So let's go ahead. Let's get to the top 5. Take it from the top, Dave. Number 1.
Yeah. So same with sleep. Biggest bang for your buck. Number 1 is vitamin D. And when the thing about it is I've been listening to podcasts and doing research. I couldn't believe how ignorant I was in terms of how important vitamin D is for immune function. We always think of it in terms of healthy bones and musculoskeletal system, but there's just this tremendous body of evidence that shows that vitamin D is so key as an immune system regulator. So what I mean by that is it keeps your immune system in balance. And what makes vitamin D different from all these other vitamins is it's converted through a bunch of enzymatic steps in your body to an active hormone. And that hormone has a multitude of effects on your body and can affect up to 5% of the genes in your body and how they're expressed. And vitamin D has a particularly important role at the level of your lung, especially the lining of the lung, that makes it much more resistant to respiratory infections. And if you do get a respiratory infection, it decreases the severity of the respiratory infections. And again, I put 5-7 links to important international studies that talk directly about vitamin D. These are big studies. that have fantastic evidence for why you should be supplementing with vitamin D. And you need to have your vitamin D level checked. Vitamin D is one of these things where you can get too much of it. So, talk to your doctor and get your levels checked before you go ahead and take huge doses.
Well, I had somebody tell me the other day, as a friend and a client, said, "Oh, I lay out by the pool all the time. I'm good." Well, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, so I've been going every year. I go to the doctor, and every year the one lab for me that comes back low is vitamin D. And one of the things I learned in my research here is that 70% of the United States population of over 300 million people has insufficient vitamin D levels, which means like if there's a range, they're at the very low end of the range, right? But even more shocking is like 25% have actual vitamin D deficiency. They're extremely low in vitamin D. Uh-oh.
All right. Is that someone joining us? Monica, you're on our webinar.
Hi, Monica.
Hi.
Can you drop off? You're coming in as a panelist.
Oh, I'm definitely not a panelist, but I believe him. Okay, bye.
Bye. we have a shared account. She probably just logged into the same link, so it's okay. It's all good.
So you have all this deficiency in the United States, and when I go to my doctor, he doesn't tell me how important it is for immune function. He just says take a supplement, and I say, but I'm outside all the time. Like I ride bikes, I surf. Well, I also have dark skin, and people that have dark skin have lower vitamin D levels more often than not, because the way vitamin D is made is that UV radiation from sun converts pre-vitamin D to vitamin D, which then undergoes a number of enzymatic steps to become the active hormonal form. So if you have dark skin, you're already at a disadvantage. If you have dark skin and you live in a northern latitude, a place like Ireland or Seattle, or then you have a real double whammy because you just don't even have enough exposure. A lot of people work inside, they don't get the exposure. But here's the best one of all. If you use sunblock and you're outside, you're blocking that conversion of inactive to active vitamin D. And so I have dark skin and I put sunblock all over me when I go outside. So that's probably why I have low vitamin D levels.
Yeah, it's funny. You would think it would work in reverse, but when you break it down so simply, it makes so much sense. Let's talk about number 2 beyond vitamin D. Number 2 is what?
Well, vitamin C is, everybody knows vitamin C is good for colds, right? And there's a large body of evidence that shows that vitamin C doesn't necessarily prevent you from catching a cold, but it decreases the duration and the severity. Exactly the same. Vitamin D might actually prevent you from getting viral illnesses, but if you do get it, it absolutely lessens the severity. With vitamin C, there's not a lot of great evidence to say that you won't get it, but definitely lessens the severity. And unlike vitamin D, you can take as much vitamin C as you want. It's a water-soluble vitamin, and you should probably be taking it 3 times a day. And liposomal vitamin C in particular, or getting vitamin C from fresh fruits and vegetables, has greater absorption. So take all the vitamin C you want, and there's great data to say it helps your immune system, particularly with colds.
All right. What about number 3?
Before we go, in the ICU, when you're extremely ill and you have sepsis and you are dying, they'll often give you IV vitamin C in huge doses. And it's been shown to decrease the ICU severity of illness and death from things like sepsis. So this is something they're doing as an actual form of treatment in the ICU when you're really, really sick. So take as much vitamin C as you can to not end up there, but definitely good evidence for vitamin C. So the next one?
Yeah.
Zinc. So zinc's interesting. We all have heard that zinc helps with colds and flus, right? And how does zinc work? Well, zinc basically blocks the enzyme that viruses require to hijack your intracellular machinery So viruses get into your cell, and what they do is they just like basically take over the functions within the cell that make genes and proteins and things like that. It's called RNA polymerase, and it hijacks your body's ability. It hijacks your body's machinery. And what zinc does is it interferes with this. It basically blocks RNA polymerase, the viral RNA polymerase. There's a problem with zinc, though. It's a positively charged ion, and it's very difficult to get it into the cell. Without it being intracellular, inside the cells, it does very little for you. So, and we'll talk in a minute about how you get it into the cell. But intracellular zinc definitely been shown to decrease viral illness.
That was interesting what you told me when we were doing our research about how you think you take a supplement or a vitamin and you just think it's going to get into the proper parts of your body. And when you're talking about zinc, I was fascinated to hear how that doesn't happen. Can you speak to that? 'Cause I think that's probably what, number 4 or 5 on your list of how to get that zinc into the cellular part to work in your favor.
Yeah, you have to take zinc in combination with another supplement that creates a pore, or what's called an ionophore, which basically allows the zinc to be brought from the outside of the cell, the extracellular environment, to the inside of the cell, the intracellular environment, where it has its function against viruses. And there's certain types of things that do that, and actually hydroxychloroquine is one of them, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But quercetin is a very, very good antioxidant and also a zinc ionophore. So it can get the zinc from the outside to the inside. Also, I got to say that zinc is one of these things where you can take too much of it, and it can actually negatively affect your ability to hold on to copper. So you don't want to overdo the zinc.
Can you spell that, quercetin? Can you spell that word? Again, for everybody that's out there, hang tight. We have a document on all of this. I know it's scientific. There's a list. We'll recap it at the end, but we're going to give this out to everybody along the recording this week. So feel free to take notes. If you're driving, no big deal. You will get this from us. But can you spell that for everybody out there who might be taking notes?
Yeah, Quercetin, quercetin.
Yeah, something most people have never heard of. When I was telling one of my friends about what you talked about zinc, he didn't even know he'd never even heard of it. So it's funny when you think you're taking zinc and that's good enough. It's good to have that one extra step to be able to make it effective when you're taking it.
Exactly. Without ionophore, the zinc probably does very little for you. With maybe the exception of zinc lozenges. A really good study from UC San Diego showed that lozenges in the back of your throat can directly impact viral replication or virus spreading. So, but otherwise, if you have the disease and it's getting into your cells, the zinc needs to also be inside your cell in order to block the viruses from reproducing.
All right. So number 5, before we get to honorable mentions, I know you have a few more that'll be outside of the top 5 we'll bring up. What's the 5th that we're going to talk about today?
Well, back to quercetin real quick. It's found in a lot of foods like onions and capers and red wine. But having a supplement with quercetin and bromelain gets much higher levels in your blood. So, and again, it's a powerful antioxidant, has other health benefits as well. Number 5 is N-acetylcysteine, otherwise known as NAC or NAC. Again, it's a powerful antioxidant. It's the medicine we use for Tylenol overdoses because it helps the liver deal with toxic load by helping reduce an enzyme called glutathione. Anyway, there was a study in 1997, like a really big study, that showed that NAC supplementation over several months in 2 groups, or one group had it, one group didn't have it, decreased severity of flu, the standard flu. So by about 50%. So it didn't decrease the likelihood of you getting the flu, but if you did get the flu, your symptoms were half as bad and the length of the flu is about half as long. And that study comes up over and over again. And that brings me to something here. You know, a lot of these, there are no COVID studies, right? We don't have with the vitamins. Vitamin D ones are being done right now. But what we're talking about here is circumstantial evidence, right? So if we know it works on a bunch of viruses through studies that are very similar to COVID, you know, like flu and rhinovirus and other types of coronaviruses, then we're basically saying it's likely to have these effects on COVID. And I would bet on it. And again, all of these things, they have other health benefits besides COVID, you know, so there's really not a lot of downside here.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was just blown away. Actually, when preparing for this, I went and just do a typical Google search, went on some LinkedIn, some guys that I follow, and I couldn't imagine there was so much time and function and energy put on what's going to happen after the fact. There just is not a lot of articles out there that talk about preventative. It was almost like ratios were 4-to-1 just in my studies. Not enough people are talking about simple things that we can do to help ourselves. And everyone's talking about the vaccine and these other controversial drugs, which I know you'll talk about at the end here. But these are simple things that we can do, guys. This is important.
They're free and you should be doing them anyway. I mean, sleep and vitamin D have health benefits for your heart and anti-cancer properties. I mean, these are things that people want anyway.
All right, so let's go. We have a couple honorable mentions. I know we always want to keep this to 45 minutes to an hour. And by the way, anybody out there has any questions, you can drop at the bottom Q&A. I'll be screening those for the end. We'll keep those open for Dave. It's not very often you get someone like this, you know, give you free advice. I know he's not your doctor, of course, but he can kind of point you in a direction when it comes to some of these supplements. Again, we have this document that we will distribute. It's going to have a disclaimer right up front. So if you have any questions, talk to your doctor about those things. But talk about some of these honorable mentions, Dave. I think it's really important because these are some natural things, some of the things in the honorable mentions that are right in our foods that we get right at the store. Talk about those.
Yeah, so the common sort of thread that goes through all of these things are decreasing inflammation in your body. So anti-inflammatories and antioxidants are the two main things. And so my whole list, every one of these things sort of hits those. Turmeric is one that we know is a powerful natural antioxidant. Probably decreases cytokines, which are known as the inflammatory mediators. They're how cells talk to each other, but they're also the things that are getting out of control in cytokine storm, which is killing people with COVID, particularly interleukin-6 and interleukin-8. Those are two that get revved up too much, and turmeric is probably something that can help sort of modulate that. Turmeric is poorly absorbed, so it needs to be taken with food. Fat soluble. Other ones include magnesium. Magnesium is a smooth muscle relaxant. Magnesium is actually something that we're putting people on in the ICU when they're very sick to, again, decrease cytokine storm and improve your odds of surviving. And then omega-3 and fish oils are known sort of anti-inflammatories as well. Great to get through your diet. You know, you should be having a diet high in healthy fats, but you can definitely supplement with things like krill oil or various types of fish oils.
All right, so here's a question. This seems fundamental, but maybe not so much. Because I know when we did our research and again, the documents you gave us, we got everything that you said. And of course, natural tendency is you put them all out there on the counter, and some people like big pills, some people don't. You take a big glass of water and you take it. What's the proper way to do this? Okay, if you're having, this, and again, the amounts and the quantities you'll see in the document. What's the best way to do that? Some of these, as my wife and I learned, are not good on an empty stomach. So they can make you feel a little bit nauseous. Can you speak a little bit about the proper way, if you were to go to the store and even get these top 5 or, incorporate, the honorable mentions could be in your foods, but if you bought these straight as vitamins, what's the best strategy on how to actually take them?
I always take them with food. By the way, all of the ones I got, maybe the exception of 2 were off Amazon. I mean, it's just like click, 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 and they come to your door like in 2 days. But I take mine twice a day with food. once in the late morning, and then again at dinner time. Again, with zinc for me, if I take it on an empty stomach, I feel kind of nauseous. So I always take it with food.
All right. We did have a question that popped in here real quick. Thanks, Peter, for joining. Question to you, Dave. Is it beneficial to hydrate with alkalized water with a pH over 7? Does alkalized water really provide health benefits? Thank you.
I don't know. I'd like to think that it does, but I have not spent a lot of time looking into that, and I don't think there's any harm, but I'm not sure there's a real benefit. When you put things into your body that aren't pH neutral, or the pH of your body's very fast at adjusting it to whatever the sort of surrounding environment is.
All right, another question quick. Stace, thanks. I do IV drips. Are they helpful? IV drips, very popular.
Yeah, so that's interesting. There's people that are going to IV centers, which are all over the place now, to get high dose vitamin C, for example. And I would say this: if you're starting to feel ill and you go and get a high dose vitamin C infusion, there's probably real benefit to that, because the amount of vitamin C you can get intravascularly far exceeds what you can take orally. And the problem with vitamin C is you pee it out very, very quickly. So of all of my supplements here, vitamin C is the one that you can take like 3 or 4 times a day to try to maintain high blood levels. But if you go to an infusion clinic, you can get blood levels that are like 100 times higher. And I just don't know enough about how frequently you would need to do that. But that's something like if I knew that I had been exposed to somebody with SARS and I started I had a fever and I not supposed to go out, but I felt sick. That's something that I'd want.
That's great. Yeah, that's obviously become more and more popular with COVID. I've seen some of my friends who would normally even think of doing something like that or making that part of their regimen, doing IV drips. So that's great. Great question. So David, one of the questions that came up, and I know that's something that I guess, if you will, could be deemed controversial because a certain person mentioned it. But I know that the questions come up here on the Q&A, and it's also here.
You're going to talk about hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine. So can you just talk about this? I know that let's be very clear about this, guys. We're not being political, but it's a question that came up, and we'll answer it. We don't avoid questions here.
All right. The pros for hydroxychloroquine was in certain types of lab experiments, it was shown to be a zinc ionophore. Hydroxychloroquine plus zinc resulted in higher intracellular levels of zinc, which basically stopped viral replication in a lab, in a petri dish. Unfortunately, there have been numerous studies during the COVID time that have not shown any benefit for hydroxychloroquine in humans. A lot of the studies have been poorly done. They've been underpowered. They've had a lot of confounders. They haven't been randomized, controlled, or blinded. The one that we look at most was a large retrospective, and that means retrospective means looking back at what's already happened and then trying to kind of like put people in categories. A large retrospective study from the Veterans Administration Hospital looking at a bunch of veterans that had gotten COVID, and the hydroxychloroquine was actually shown to have worse outcomes. But we don't draw too much. What we draw from that is, like, if you look at the data really closely, it was likely that the sicker patients got the hydroxychloroquine because they were just throwing everything at these people and they were running out of options. And they're like, let's just try hydroxychloroquine. And they did worse. So you can't really say it made them worse, but it certainly didn't make them better. And the problem with hydroxychloroquine in sick people in particular is it can affect your heart rhythm. It can cause something called QT prolongation, which basically means the EKG tracing is drawn out. The repolarization part is drawn out, and that can lead, when you're very sick, to arrhythmias, and some of them can be deadly. So there's nothing to show. I mean, I even before this, I knew this question would come. I looked at 5 or 6 studies and podcasts, and we do not recommend hydroxychloroquine. It's still being used in some places. because some people are trying new things, like combining it with zinc, for example. We need to see if that works in people, but it's not something that we're recommending.
Yep. Can you, I know you've been excited a little bit about some of the other combinations. I know Dexa, you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the opposite, something that we're very excited about. And on the outset of this talk, we talked about buying ourselves time, right? Every month we know about how to treat people better, avoid the ventilator, go prone, things like that, right? Well, we also have a drug now called dexamethasone, otherwise known as Decadron, which is a steroid, right? And it's cheap, and we have tons of it in this country. And there was a large study recently done in England called the Recovery Trial, 6,500 patients, randomized prospectively and blinded. So like how you're supposed to do. The gold standard of a trial is to basically have groups, blinded to the condition. And the results were astounding. Decadron, I do believe, and I gotta check my notes, I do believe they even stopped the study early because the benefits were so clear. They didn't want to deprive anybody of the Decadron. So just real quick on my notes, patients who are on oxygen. So the way it works is you get sick, you go to the hospital, and if you get worse because your oxygen levels are going down, you get put on oxygen, supplemental oxygen, first in your nose and then later by a mask. And when that turns out to be too little, you end up on a ventilator. People that were requiring oxygen who got dexamethasone, them going from oxygen to death decreased by 20%. People that were already on a ventilator, like the sickest of the sick, death rate decreased by 35%. And the number needed to treat was only 8, which is astounding. That means out of every 8 people, you prevented death in 1. And again, this drug is cheap. It's ubiquitous. We have a lot of it. And the amount that we're using isn't even that high. It's 6 milligrams a day. So this is exciting. This is as an exciting of a sort of discovery as there's been since from the start. Because we have other drugs that are like remdesivir, for example. You've heard about that. It's a drug used in certain diseases that like HIV that block viral replication. Very expensive, and we have a limited supply. So dexamethasone is the opposite. We have lots of it.
That's great. I'm excited when you told me about these combinations, and I think, like you said at the beginning, we bought so much time from March till now. Doctors like you are on the front lines are seeing possibilities with combinations of things we already have. So instead of having to wait for the vaccine, you guys are right there in the ER figuring out ways to minimize. So I appreciate you sharing those data points. Sure. And by the way, I know of Dave a long time. He's a massive research guy. So if anything in here, I always say, don't judge, be curious. It's one of my rules of thumb. Anything in here, go research it on your own. Go find it out. He's always got 2 or 3 studies to back up, or he's got personal stories right there in Orange County, California, where he's seeing stuff on the front lines. So Dave, we'll start to wrap up here. We're at about the 45-minute mark, and I know questions as they come in, I've been asking them. So if you have them, feel free to type in the Q&A. I wanted to kind of conclude with something we mentioned in our last webinar. We talked about mindset. The mindset part is such a big thing, right? Being great, have gratitude, reaching out to people in your life, staying connected to people. There's proven studies on how these simple things that we could do that are behavioral. These are not supplements. These are acts that we can do from a behavioral perspective that helps our anxiety go down, helps depression go down. I want you to speak to that a little bit, because you have to remember, guys, what Dave does in his everyday life, medically assisted treatment, he's helping people who have serious addiction issues. So not just from a medical perspective, but teaching them lifestyle change and things that they can do, acts, behaviors that they can do to help themselves kind of get to a new level set. So can you talk about a couple of quick points there, Dave? I know you coach your patients in that regard. I think it's important for people to hear that beyond supplements and vitamins when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's listed in one of our 5 behavior hazards is decreasing stress. And that's easy to say, but hard to do. We all know that stress is not healthy for us, and there's a bunch of biological reasons for that. But decreasing stress, and whether it's mindfulness, whether it's breathing exercises and meditation, whether it's engaging in types of activities that, are like flow states or exercise, or basically meaningful relationships and engagement with other people. All of these have been shown to basically lower stress levels, and stress levels are associated with higher levels of cortisol, higher levels of circulating catecholamines like epinephrine, norepinephrine, which are your fight and flight, neurotransmitters or neurohormones. And having consistently high levels of these things, not only does it lead to like unhappiness and depression and anxiety, but on a cellular level, it inhibits proper functioning, especially immune function. So being mindful of the role that stress is having in your life, it's all interrelated. Not only your mental health and your physical health cannot be they're not mutually exclusive. There's tremendous overlap between the two. And I don't think we give enough sort of credit to that.
All right. Well, Dave, want to wrap up. I didn't see any more Q&A. I've had a couple people actually text me. Some of you stay off of the Q&A here and text me, which is fine. But yeah, the answer is we will be sending out the document that summarizes everything today. So, and also, we've recorded this. I guess we were successful with Facebook Live, which is nice. So anybody wants to go back and rewatch that on Facebook Live, or feel free to share it across that medium. But by Thursday, you'll get a recorded version of this. Dave, any parting thoughts? I also want to say thank you very much. You've been so passionate, especially these last crazy 6 months, and not only just advising, giving me, coaching for myself and my family, but I hear how you interface with your patients and your colleagues at the hospital. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing this information. Is there any parting thoughts before we let everybody go?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, by the way. I appreciate it. It's funny when I do research for this, how many rabbit holes I go down, and how I want to convey so much more information that there's time for. And so I put the highlights on these lists, and everything here has research to support it. But my main parting thought is that this will be over at some point. And we're going to have learned a tremendous amount about this disease and the things that we'll do if we see something like this again. It seems like it's been forever since it started, but it's been a pretty short period of time. But it will end at some point. But you absolutely should do everything in your power not to get it. Buy yourself as much time as possible. There will be a vaccine. And if you do get it, you want to do all the things we talked about to minimize your chances of becoming somebody that gets very sick or even dies.
Yeah. Great. All right, everybody, thanks for joining. Good crowd. It's very rare you get all the registrants to attend. I was looking at the percentage of people who actually showed up. So the registrants were right on point. So we will get this out. I know there's a lot of people who did register that did not make it. We'll make sure we get this recording out to those folks. And again, we're very abundant about the stuff. Feel free to share it. Thanks, Dave.